Your stupidity was the greatest gift you ever gave me.
I'd been married to Sarah for 18 years. We have a 16-year-old son, Marcus, who's honestly the best kid a dad could ask for. For the past several years, Sarah had been traveling constantly for her corporate marketing job, sometimes gone for weeks at a time. She claimed it was all for our future, and that these business trips were essential for her career advancement. Like an idiot, I believed her and supported her dreams. While she was off building her career, I stayed home, raised Marcus, kept the house running, cooked meals, helped with homework, fixed everything that broke, and basically lived like a single dad. I'd given up my own job years earlier because Sarah insisted one of us needed to be home for Marcus, and she was the breadwinner. I didn't mind. I loved being there for my son, and I thought we were a team. That Tuesday evening changed everything. I was sitting on our couch, flipping through channels and trying to find something decent to watch, when the front door suddenly swung open. Sarah walked in with this commanding presence she'd developed over the years, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood some guy I'd never seen before. Perfectly styled hair, expensive suit, the kind of smug confidence that screams, corporate climber. He had this satisfied smirk like he'd already won some game I didn't even know we were playing. But what really threw me was the little girl clinging to Sarah's hand. She looked maybe 4 or 5 years old with dark curly hair and these big, confused eyes that kept darting around our living room like she wasn't sure where she'd landed. She clearly belonged with Sarah somehow. They had the same nose, the same chin. Marcus was sitting next to me on the couch, scrolling through his phone like any typical teenager. But I saw him freeze when they walked in. His screen went dark and his hands gripped the phone tighter. He'd always been perceptive, picking up on things I missed, and I could feel the tension radiating from him even though he didn't say a word. Sarah didn't even look at me initially. She just marched straight to the kitchen counter, dropped her designer purse with a loud thud, then turned to face me with this cold, hard stare I'd never seen before. It was like looking at a complete stranger wearing my wife's face. "Sign these divorce papers and leave. Now," she said in this flat, matter-of-fact tone, like she was telling me to take out the garbage. It wasn't a request or even an argument starter. It was a command, delivered like I was some employee she was firing. I sat there blinking, trying to process what she'd just said. Divorce papers? Leave? My heart started hammering in my chest like it was trying to break free and run away from this nightmare. The TV kept buzzing in the background, some mindless commercial that suddenly seemed incredibly loud. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out this thick stack of legal documents, slapping them down on our coffee table with a sharp sound that echoed through the room like a gunshot. "This is done," she announced, crossing her arms. "We're done." The guy behind her, I later learned his name was Derek, shifted his weight and looked even more smug if that was possible. He was clearly enjoying this whole performance. The little girl, Emma, just stood there holding Sarah's hand, staring at me like I was some stranger she'd never seen before, which I guess in her world I was. I looked down at those papers, the black ink swimming a little as my eyes struggled to focus. Divorce. She wasn't kidding around. After 18 years of marriage, after building a life together, after everything we'd been through, she was standing there telling me to pack up and get out of my own home. "Sarah," I finally managed to say, my voice coming out rough like I hadn't used it in days. "What is this? Who are these people?" She rolled her eyes like I was the biggest idiot in the world for even asking. "This is my life now," she said, gesturing toward Derek and Emma like they were prizes she'd won at some carnival. "You've been sitting here doing absolutely nothing while I've been building something real. Sign the papers, take whatever junk you want, and go." Her words hit me like physical blows, each one sinking deeper into my chest. Nothing. She called what I'd been doing nothing. I'd raised our son, maintained our home, supported her career, waited for her through countless lonely nights while she drifted further and further away from us. And now she was rewriting our entire history, painting me as some deadbeat loser who didn't contribute anything. I glanced over at Marcus, hoping he might say something to back me up, but he just sat there staring at his mother with these narrowed eyes like he was studying her, figuring her out. I could tell he was hurt. Hell, I was devastated, but he wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing it. Neither was I. Not yet, anyway. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, trying to keep my breathing steady and my voice controlled. "You can't just walk in here and kick me out," I said quietly. "This is my home, too." Sarah laughed. this sharp, bitter sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "You're home? You've got no job? No money? Nothing? You're lucky I didn't do this years ago." She thought she had me pinned down, helpless, ready to slink away with my tail between my legs. Derek smirked again, and I wanted nothing more than to wipe that look off his face, but I stayed put. I just sat there, letting her words bounce around in my head while I tried to figure out how the woman I'd loved for half my life had turned into this cold stranger standing in front of me. The little girl tugged on Sarah's hand and whispered something I couldn't make out. Sarah bent down, murmured something back, then straightened up and brushed her off like she was an annoying interruption. That's when I really looked at Emma, really studied her face. Dark hair, round cheeks, Sarah's distinctive nose and chin. My stomach dropped as the pieces started clicking together. How long had this been going on? How long had my wife been living this double life while I was here playing dad and husband, thinking we were still a family? This wasn't some recent fling. This little girl was proof that Sarah had been planning this escape for years, building a whole other life while I was home keeping everything together. "Dad," Marcus said suddenly, his voice cutting through the fog in my head. I turned to look at him, and he gave me this small, almost imperceptible nod, like he was telling me to hang in there. He didn't look at his mother, didn't acknowledge Derek or Emma. He just kept his steady eyes on me, and somehow that was enough to pull me back from the edge, to keep me from completely falling apart right there in front of them. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and looked back at Sarah. "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said, my voice stronger now. "You don't get to waltz in here and blow up everything we built without a fight." Her eyes flashed with annoyance, like she genuinely hadn't expected me to push back. Derek's smirk faded just a little, and Marcus continued his silent vigil beside me. I knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. For years, I'd been the one holding our family together while Sarah chased her ambitions. When she said her career required extensive travel, I didn't argue. I stayed home, made sure Marcus had clean clothes and hot meals, helped him with homework, attended his school events when she couldn't make it back in time. She'd breeze in for a weekend, all expensive perfume and designer clothes, then vanish again for weeks. I didn't chase her or demand explanations when she came home smelling like unfamiliar cologne. I trusted her because I loved her, because I believed we were working toward the same future. When she said she needed space to focus on her career, I gave it to her. When she stopped calling as often, I figured she was just busy. I kept making excuses for her behavior because I didn't want to see what was really happening. But now she was using all that trust and patience against me, twisting it into evidence that I was the one who'd checked out of our marriage. She was rewriting our history to make me the villain in her story, the dead weight she needed to cut loose so she could sail off into her perfect new life. "You expect me to just walk away?" I asked, keeping my voice level even though my hands were trembling slightly. I shoved them into my lap so she wouldn't notice. "After everything I've done for this family?" Sarah's cold laugh bounced off the walls. "Family? You mean sitting around pretending to be a writer while I paid all the bills? I've been carrying this household financially, and I'm exhausted from it." That stung because it contained just enough twisted truth to hurt. Yes, I'd given up my traditional job years ago, but it was for Marcus, for her, because she'd begged me to be the stable parent while she climbed her corporate ladder. I'd sacrificed my own career ambitions because I thought we were partners building something together. Now she was making it sound like I'd been some lazy parasite living off her success. I wanted to remind her of all those nights I'd stayed up with Marcus when he was sick, all the times I'd fixed things around the house with my own hands, all the ways I'd kept our family functioning when her job didn't bring in enough to cover our mortgage. But I held back. I wasn't ready to show all my cards yet. Marcus shifted beside me, his knee brushing against mine, and I could feel him coiled like a spring, ready to explode. He'd been watching this whole scene unfold, taking it all in with those sharp eyes of his. He'd always been smarter than me in some ways, quicker to see through people's facades. I wondered if he'd seen this betrayal coming long before I had. Sarah kept talking, laying out her victory speech like she'd rehearsed it during the drive over. "Derek and I have something real," she said, glancing at him with a smile I hadn't seen her give me in years. "Emma's part of that future. You're not—" Each word landed like a brick, building a wall between us that felt insurmountable. I looked at Emma again, this innocent little girl who'd been dragged into a situation she couldn't possibly understand. She didn't deserve to be a weapon in Sarah's war against our family. but my wife was too focused on her grand exit to care about collateral damage. But here's what Sarah didn't know. What she couldn't have known because she'd been too busy with her secret life to pay attention to mine. During all those lonely evenings when she was supposedly working late in distant cities, I hadn't just been sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I'd been writing. It started as a way to fill the empty hours, a creative outlet that helped me process the growing distance between us. I'd sit at my laptop after Marcus went to bed, crafting stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. The writing became my refuge, my way of making sense of a world that felt increasingly unstable. What began as a hobby gradually transformed into something much bigger. I started submitting my work to publishers under the pen name R.J. Hayes because I wanted to keep my writing separate from my daily life. I didn't want the pressure of family expectations or the potential embarrassment if I failed. But I didn't fail. My first novel got picked up by a small publisher and did surprisingly well. The second one gained more traction. By the third book, The Patient Game, I was hitting bestseller lists and fielding calls from movie producers. The royalty checks started rolling in, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. All deposited into accounts Sarah didn't even know existed. I kept it quiet, not out of deception, but because the success felt surreal. I was still processing the fact that words I'd written in our spare bedroom were being read by thousands of people across the country. I used the money responsibly, paid off our mortgage, set up college funds for Marcus, made sure our family's future was secure. But I never flaunted it or changed our lifestyle in obvious ways. Sarah assumed I was broke because I didn't have a conventional job. She had no idea that her deadbeat husband had been quietly out-earning her for the past few years. She was so wrapped up in her own affairs, literally, that she never bothered to investigate what I was actually doing with my time. "You really think it's that simple?" I asked, cutting through her monologue. She stopped mid-sentence, tilting her head slightly like she wasn't used to me talking back. "What?" she snapped, clearly annoyed. "You think you have some kind of claim here? You've got nothing. No leverage." She was so confident, so absolutely certain that she'd cornered me completely. Derek nodded along like he was part of the master plan, probably already mentally redecorating our living room. I let the silence stretch for a moment, just long enough to make her shift uncomfortably. "The house," I said finally, leaning back and crossing my arms. "It's not yours to take." Confusion flickered across her face, followed quickly by irritation. "What are you talking about? Dad left it to me when he died." She was clinging to that old assumption, so sure of her inheritance. I shook my head slowly, deliberately. "No, Sarah, he didn't." For the first time since she'd walked in, that smug look of absolute certainty faltered. She didn't know about my conversations with her father in his final years, didn't know how disgusted he'd become with her treatment of Marcus and me. Her dad, Tom, had been a straightforward man who valued family loyalty above everything else. He'd watched Sarah come and go like a stranger, barely acknowledging the grandson she was supposed to love. He'd see me handling everything. School pickups, doctor appointments, birthday parties Sarah was too busy to attend, and he'd made his choice about who deserved to inherit the home he'd built. Years ago, Tom had quietly transferred the deed to me. It was all legal, properly notarized and filed with the county. He'd trusted me to provide stability for Marcus in ways his own daughter couldn't. Sarah never knew because she never bothered to check the paperwork, too confident in her assumptions to verify the facts. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the scanned copy of the deed I'd saved for situations exactly like this one. I held it up, letting her see the date, the signatures, the official stamps that made it legally binding. "It's all here," I said calmly. "Legal and documented. You can verify it with the county records if you want." Sarah's face drained of color like someone had pulled a plug. She grabbed the phone from my hand, her fingers shaking as she zoomed in on the document, reading every word with growing horror. Derek leaned over her shoulder, his confident expression crumbling as he realized their plan had a massive hole in it. Emma stayed quiet, still clutching Sarah's leg, her little face scrunched up in confusion. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She was an innocent caught in the middle of adult games she couldn't understand. Sarah shoved my phone back at me, her eyes blazing with desperation. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but her voice shook noticeably. "I'll fight this. You can't keep me out of my own home." I smiled slightly, feeling the ground steady beneath me for the first time since she'd walked in. "You can try," I said, "but my name's on the deed, not yours." She glared at me, her perfect plan crumbling, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to find another angle of attack. That's when Marcus finally moved, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He still didn't say anything, but his presence beside me felt solid and supportive. But I wasn't done yet. Sarah still thought she could salvage something from this wreckage, still believed she had cards to play. I was about to show her just how thoroughly she'd underestimated me. Marcus stood up from the couch with deliberate slowness, his sneakers making soft sounds against our hardwood floor. He'd been silent through this entire confrontation, just watching and listening, but I could tell he was ready to make his move. He walked over to our coffee table, stepping past the divorce papers and the evidence of my property ownership, and picked up a book I'd left there a few days earlier. It was a hardcover copy of The Patient Game, thick, with a deep blue cover and gold lettering that caught the light. Marcus held it out toward Sarah, his expression completely unreadable. "He wrote this," Marcus said, nodding toward me. "Dad is R.J. Hayes." I watched Sarah's jaw drop, her eyes widening as she stared at the book like it was a live explosive. Derek frowned in confusion, but Sarah knew exactly what this meant. That book had been everywhere for months. Bookstores, bestseller lists, entertainment news talking about the streaming rights deal. She'd probably seen it a dozen times without ever connecting it to her supposedly worthless husband. My stomach did a little flip, a mixture of pride and nervousness hitting me all at once. I'd never told her about my writing career, never revealed the pen name or the success that had grown from those quiet nights when she was away. For years, I'd been building this secret creative life while she assumed I was just wasting time. Sarah snatched the book from Marcus's hands, her fingers trembling as she flipped it open and scanned the title page like she could somehow prove it was fake. This can't be you," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't." She couldn't finish the sentence, too shocked to form coherent thoughts. I leaned back on the couch, crossing my arms, letting her process this revelation at her own speed. "It's me," I said simply. "Has been for a while now." Her head snapped up, eyes locking onto mine, and I saw something new there. Panic, maybe even fear. She'd constructed this entire narrative where I was nothing, a loser she could discard without consequence. Now she was holding physical proof that she'd been completely wrong about me, and it was shattering her confidence. Derek moved closer, peering over her shoulder at the book with growing unease. "What's the big deal?" he asked, his voice edgy with confusion. Sarah turned to him, her face pale and tight. "This is a bestseller," she said, almost whispering. "It's worth millions. And he wrote it." Derek's eyes widened, his smug grin disappearing completely. He looked at me like I'd suddenly transformed into an entirely different person, which I suppose I had in their minds. They both seen me as the quiet background figure they could ignore and manipulate. Now I was the guy with a secret they couldn't touch, and it was driving them both crazy. "How?" Sarah demanded, turning back to me with the book still clutched in her hands. "When did you even—" She couldn't complete the question, too rattled to think straight. I shrugged, keeping my voice calm and matter-of-fact. "While you were gone, mostly evenings, I had a lot of time to think and write." That reminder of her absence stung her visibly. I could see it in the way her mouth twitched, the way she flinched slightly. She hated being confronted with the reality of how much she'd missed, how many hours I'd spent alone while she was building her secret life with Derek. Marcus sat back down next to me, his expression steady, but with the faintest hint of satisfaction. He'd known about my writing for months after stumbling across one of my manuscripts, but he'd kept the secret perfectly, proud of his dad in his own quiet way. Sarah flipped through the pages frantically, then stopped and looked at me again. "You hid this from me," she accused, her voice low and bitter. "All this time you were what? Laughing at me behind my back?" I shook my head firmly. "I wasn't hiding it to hurt you, I just didn't need you to know." That was the honest truth. I hadn't written those books for her approval or recognition. The writing was mine, something she couldn't take away or diminish, and that independence had been precious to me. She stared at me, the book slipping slightly in her grip, and I could see her frantically recalculating everything she thought she knew about our situation. She'd walked in here expecting to steamroll a broken man with no options. Instead, she was discovering that her worthless husband had been quietly building something impressive while she was off playing house with Derek. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You never really saw him, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but firm. You never saw either of us? Those words hit Sarah like a physical slap. She flinched, her eyes darting between Marcus and me, and for the first time since walking through our door, she was completely speechless. The room felt heavy with all the truth she'd been avoiding, all the family moments she'd sacrificed for her secret life. That book wasn't just pages and ink. It represented the life I'd built without her, the strength and creativity she'd never bothered to recognize. And it changed absolutely everything about the power dynamic she thought she controlled. But even as I watched her world tilt on its axis, I knew I had one more revelation that would completely destroy whatever was left of her plan. I watched Sarah clutch the patient game like it was the last solid thing in her rapidly crumbling world, her face cycling through shock, anger, and desperate calculation. Marcus's words, "You never really saw him, Mom," still hung in the air, heavy with years of accumulated truth she'd refused to acknowledge. She was scrambling now, trying to find some way to regain control of a situation that had spun completely beyond her expectations. Derek stood behind her, looking increasingly uncomfortable, probably realizing he'd hitched himself to a sinking ship. "The royalties," Sarah said suddenly, her voice sharp with desperate hope. "Those are marital assets, right? I'm entitled to half of everything you earned while we were married." She'd found what she thought was her lifeline, a way to salvage something from this disaster. Derek's eyes lit up with greedy interest, like he could already hear cash registers ringing. He stepped closer, his voice eager with false bravado. "Yeah, that's how it works," he said, trying to reclaim some authority. "You can't just keep all that money to yourself. Community property and all that." Sarah nodded frantically, latching on to his support, her confidence flickering back to life. "We were married when you wrote it," she said, pointing at the book. "That means half of it belongs to me, to us." She thought she'd found her escape hatch, a way to turn this humiliation into profit. I could see her mentally calculating dollar amounts, probably already planning how to spend royalties that would never come her way. I let her talk, let her build up that hope, because watching it collapse was going to be even sweeter than anything I could say. Marcus shifted beside me, and I knew he was waiting for the final bomb to drop. He'd seen some of the paperwork I'd been organizing, but he didn't know the complete scope of what I'd accomplished. I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees, and looked Sarah straight in the eye. "Actually, Sarah, the divorce was finalized 2 weeks ago. You already signed away any rights to my assets." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Derek froze mid-gesture, his mouth falling open. Emma looked up at the sudden silence, confused by the shift in energy. "What are you talking about?" Sarah whispered, but I could see the dawning horror in her eyes. I reached for the divorce papers she'd dramatically slapped on our coffee table, flipping through them to the signature page. There it was, her name in that familiar rushed handwriting, dated exactly 2 weeks prior when my attorney had sent the documents through her lawyer. "You signed, without reading the details," I said, tapping the page. "Again." Sarah lunged for the papers, snatching them from my hands with shaking fingers. Her eyes scanned the legal language frantically, looking for some loophole or escape clause that didn't exist. This can't be right," she stammered, her voice breaking. I didn't agree to this." But there it was, her signature authorizing everything. No alimony, no claim to my royalties, no rights to property she didn't own. It was all legally binding and already filed with the court. I'd been planning this for months, ever since I discovered concrete evidence of her affair with Derek. I'd hired a discreet attorney, started the divorce process quietly, and crafted settlement terms that protected everything I'd worked for. When the papers came through her lawyer, Sarah had been so focused on her grand exit strategy that she'd signed them immediately, probably assuming she'd deal with the financial details after she'd kicked me out. "You tricked me!" Derek snarled, his face flushing red as he stepped toward me threateningly. I didn't flinch or back down. "Nobody tricked anybody," I said calmly. She should have read what she was signing. That's basic adult responsibility. Sarah was hyperventilating now, flipping through pages like she could somehow change the words through sheer willpower. "I'll fight this," she said, her voice high and desperate. "I'll get a lawyer, take you to court, prove you coerced me into signing." I shook my head with calm certainty. "It's over, Sarah. The court already approved everything. You've got nothing left to fight with." Marcus spoke up then, leaning back on the couch with a small, satisfied smile. You thought Dad was some pushover you could walk all over, he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. But he's been playing chess while you were playing checkers. That observation hit Sarah harder than anything else. She stared at her son, our son, realizing she'd lost him completely. He wasn't her little boy anymore. He was firmly on my side, proud of how I'd handled her betrayal. I stood up slowly, stretching and feeling lighter than I had in years. You want it out, Sarah. You've got it. Take Derek, take Emma, take whatever life you've built together. Just don't expect me to finance it. She couldn't respond, couldn't find words for the magnitude of her miscalculation. Derek grabbed her arm, muttering something about figuring this out, but his voice was shaky and uncertain. All his confident swagger had evaporated. Emma tugged on Sarah's hand, whispering, "Mommy, are we leaving now?" Sarah nodded numbly, moving like she was in a trance. They'd entered our home so confident, so ready to rewrite my life according to their desires. Now they were walking out with absolutely nothing, facing a future neither had properly planned for. As they headed toward the door, I called out one final time. "You made your choices, Sarah. Live with them." The door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly the house felt peaceful for the first time in years. Just Marcus and me, and the life we'd continue building together. "You okay, Dad?" Marcus asked, looking up at me with concern. I nodded, feeling genuinely okay for the first time in months. "Yes, son, we're going to be just fine." But I wasn't quite finished with Sarah yet. The next morning, I filed for child support. Marcus was still a minor, and Sarah had a well-paying job. Better than well-paying after all those years of corporate climbing. She'd contributed almost nothing to his expenses while I'd covered everything, from school supplies to medical bills. Now it was her turn to step up. When she called a few days later, screaming about the child support filing, I remained completely calm. "You owe him," I said simply. "Years of nothing. This is fair." She tried to argue that she couldn't afford payments with Derek and Emma to support. That's when I mentioned the infidelity penalty clause, another detail buried in those divorce papers she'd signed without reading. "Pay up," I told her, "or I'll see you in court for breach of settlement terms." She went quiet, then hung up. A week later, the first check arrived. She paid because legally she had no choice. The aftermath was even more satisfying than I'd hoped. Derek lost his job when his company discovered the affair. Apparently, corporate culture frowned on executives who destroyed families. They ended up moving to a cramped apartment across town, struggling with legal fees and the reality that their fairy tale romance had real-world consequences. Meanwhile, Marcus and I settled into a comfortable routine. He started showing interest in creative writing, inspired by my success but determined to find his own voice. We'd spend evenings discussing his stories and his college applications. The house felt warm and peaceful, no longer tainted by Sarah's deceptions. Sarah tried calling once more months later, asking for parenting advice about Emma starting school. I told her to figure it out herself. She'd burned that bridge when she tried to destroy our family. Marcus decided to send her something special, a copy of my newest book, The Final Truth, with a simple inscription. From Marcus, Dad's latest bestseller. The dedication inside read, "To those who mistake quiet patience for weakness, it never is." She never contacted us again after that. Looking back, I realized my years of silence weren't weakness like Sarah assumed. They were strategy. I'd been observing, learning, preparing for the day she'd finally overplay her hand. When she made her move, thinking she could erase me from my own life, I was ready with countermoves she never saw coming. The best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation. It's simply living well and letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. Sarah thought she could rewrite our family's story through lies and betrayal, but truth has a way of winning in the end. Marcus graduates next month with early admission to a prestigious university on a creative writing scholarship. I couldn't be prouder of the young man he's become. Strong, principled, and completely aware of his own worth. We built something real together while Sarah was chasing fantasies, and that's worth more than any revenge I could have planned.